Welcome to the closing session of the day, our town hall meeting. This session is completely unscripted, candid, open dialogue. We've got some great participants here. As a matter of fact, I think we already had the session in the back a little earlier because they've already talked about everything that we're going to talk about. So I told them to keep the same level of energy during our discussion. So we'll go for about, we'll go for about 45, 50 minutes, maybe go a little bit over time just so we have some great dialogue going. We are also going to take as many questions as possible from the audience. So we will have a microphone. We're going to get started with a little bit of discussion here, but from all the things that you've heard today and all the things that you've learned today, we want to make sure that you have the opportunity to ask some of our speakers in the closing session, throw out some questions, and let's really end the event with a lot of energy, with a lot of dialogue, and with a lot of action plans to move forward. So let me introduce our distinguished speakers. John Baekelmans is Chief Technology Officer for the Internet of Everything at Cisco. Next we have Tommy Russo, who's Chief Technology Officer for Akridge. So this morning you got to hear from Chip Akridge, who's the founder and president of the company. Now you get to hear from Tommy to get his side of the story. We've also got Emma Stewart, who's the Head of Sustainability Solutions for AutoDesk. And on the end, Nils Kok, CEO of GRESB. So this is our panel this afternoon. So I want to start off, we've had a lot of discussion today about data and analytics and real-time information. Tommy, I'm going to go to you first. We're just going to have open discussion about what really is the value of getting real-time data in your buildings?
The real-time value in dollars or value in perception and reality?
Value in, what good is it to get old-time information?
Well, if you were in my session earlier, I talked about it in a car. You're driving your car down the road, and you see those great blue and red lights behind you. You pull over, and the officer walks up to the car and says, do you know how fast you're going? And I look up at the officer and say, no, I don't have a real-time speedometer. I can tell you in 15 minutes. It doesn't do you very, very good. In a building, it's the same thing. If I'm getting my data at such an old interval, and I realize that people can't tomorrow have real-time data. But they can have data real enough to actually make a difference. So in the ability to have real-time data, I think, is by far one of the most powerful tools in the building to make the building run as efficient. And actually, I was talking to somebody earlier, it's not really about being as efficient as it was designed, because I want a building to be better than designed. So one of our buildings was designed to run at like $3.81 a square foot when you do all the math, and we run it at $2.60 a square foot. 3 years old. We didn't meet their goals, we exceeded them. And we exceeded them by being able to look at the data and say, hey, we can trim what this MEP said here, we can add this here, or we can just watch static pressure and change the algorithms to which the system was designed. To take a building down by, that building is actually, I think we reduced by 21% over what it was designed to operate at. And it's a LEED Platinum, actually LEED Double Platinum building with an Energy Star score of, I want to say, 84. So the data is, without a doubt, I think the most important tool to keep the building, other than the occupants. And my owner told you this morning, the most important thing in the building is our clients. So other than the clients, I think data is the most important thing.
So Emma, from your perspective, real-time data, do we need real-time? Is 15-minute interval good? Can you use your electric bill from 30 days ago? What's the real value?
I think if you're lucky enough to be one of the minority of buildings that has instrumentation at all, then sure, you should be using that data more so than we are. Currently, it gets logged somewhere. If it looks good, it typically gets logged electronically. If it looks not so shoddy, it gets logged on a clipboard somewhere. But the problem is that then what happens? So we still need humans to look at causation, because all data gives us is correlation. And the humans are there with just a clipboard looking at checklists of likely guidance based upon rules of thumb. So one of the things that we're interested in is using simulation, to Tommy's point, to ensure that that building at least meets its design intent in terms of energy performance. And ideally, through the power of cloud computing, you're running multiple simulations in parallel at practically no cost, cents on the dollar. And it's showing you what energy conservation measures are most likely to have a positive return on investment for that building, for that occupancy schedule, for that climate zone, for that season. So you can take existing buildings, understand how they're currently performing. If you're lucky enough to have that real-time data, then fantastic. Most aren't. From that asset rating, then also look at, through simulation, the power of the potential of upgrading the equipment and the assets of that building.
So in terms of assets, Nils, what kind of data are investors really looking for in terms of the asset value of their property? How does this work?
Well, I was just thinking data's a bit like a Maslow pyramid. First there's no data, then there's annual data, then maybe there's monthly data, and at the top of the pyramid there's 50-minute interval data, or even more frequent than that. And if you happen to have a multi-tenant office building, with the latest equipment, that's perfect and that's fine. I'm looking at Ari here of Deutsche Asset and Wealth Management. He has a lot of industrial facilities in his portfolio. I mean, his scramble is data, and he's at the bottom of the Maslow pyramid. Maybe not. I'm just making it up right here, Ari. But he just needs his annual data, because the investor, we were just talking about this, the investor is not going to look at 50-minute interval data. In fact, the investor is just going to ask the question, do you actually have data? And if you have data, are you reducing or increasing? If you increase your consumption, why is it? Is it because your building is actually now occupied instead of unoccupied in a good economic environment? So it's this high-end building, 50-minute interval data. There's human resources that actually can interpret the data. But then there's the reality of the commercial and the corporate real estate space, where there's just no data. Of the 56,000 assets that we cover in GRESB with all the private equity and funds and REITs, about 65% have some data. But some data might be common areas in a multifamily building, or it might be common areas in a Simon shopping center. But the reality is 35% doesn't have any data, and of the 65% of the 56,000 assets, the majority actually only have data for a very small subset of buildings.
So how does that actually impact, asset value of the property? How do you quantify energy data and energy savings?
Well, how do you quantify? In principle, if you're an economist or a free market believer, a more efficient building should be worth more, because that lower energy spent feeds into the bottom line. What's the value of a building? It's rent capitalized, so rent minus expenses. If that number is higher, even if the cap rate is the same, you get to a higher value of an asset. I don't think that investors or asset level investors look at an energy bill, but they look at the appliances and the equipment in a building that's ultimately reflected in an energy bill. So if you put in a new heating system in your home, that's what we do in Amsterdam at least, we use heating systems more than cooling systems, you assume that if you sell your home, it's going to be more valuable. And in the same way, if Akridge renovates a building and makes it more efficient, you assume that building is going to be more valuable. In a real efficient world, you look at the decrease in energy spent, you capitalize that, and that's what you add to the value. That's a simplified world. I don't think the reality is as precise.
We quantify it by occupancy. When you're at 100%, you're 100%. If you're not, you're not. If they can go next door and get the same quality for a lesser price, then they should probably go there. If they're in our building, they're getting the best deal for the best space, and our buildings are occupied. Our owner sat there this morning and said 98% for 40 years.
I think that's a reflection of, we're at the Building Energy Summit, so I might make myself unpopular. I think the narrow focus on energy savings, we're just presenting ourselves with a mountain to climb unnecessarily, when in fact some of the productivity benefits, the avoided absenteeism, as a result of daylighting or better air quality, a high-performing building should have a higher asset value, even if from an OpEx standpoint, you're not reaping a decent ROI or a decent payback. So I think looking at it more holistically, which from a quantitative standpoint is harder even than energy, but at least we haven't hamstrung ourselves by saying, well, there's no data on energy, so we're just going to do nothing.
So
well, everybody has energy. Everybody has data on energy. You pay a bill, or your power gets turned off.
Depends on your contract, but yeah. Monthly.
Well, you get it. I mean, you can definitely quantify it based on the month, based on previous years, or if it's a new building. I mean, you're going to get the data.
But do your tenants come to your buildings because they're energy efficient, or just because they're high-performing Class A buildings? And Class A buildings by nature nowadays are, whether it's LEED certified or
I'm the technology guy. I'm going to tell you they come because I have the best space for the best price. And our buildings are occupied.
But how do you define best space?
100% occupied.
No, but what's the input for that?
I mean, what's the signal? So
what's the signal?
We have had clients that have been in our buildings that moved out because they outgrew our building. We had no more space to give them. They left and terminated a lease 3 to 4 years early to come back to one of our buildings because they missed what we offered. I mean, is it just energy savings? No, it's the whole package. But at the end of the day, if our CAM cost, which shares throughout the building, is $10 higher than the building across the street, do you think they're going to come back? No. I don't care if you give them a lollipop every day, they're not going to come back.
Right.
But if you can get them to a point where they're lower, and I guarantee it, every one of our buildings, 40% over the last 5 years, and that's not, that's total. So if it was $10, it's now $6. And we have, one of our buildings is 31 or 35 years old now, and we reduce energy consumption.
What's
by
the rent they pay
50%.
per square foot? So what percentage is energy of the rent they pay at your high quality space in downtown DC?
It's very minimal.
Exactly. So they don't care about the energy. They come to your building not because the energy bill is low, but because it's a high-performing building, and you signal that to them. Maybe because with LEED Platinum or...
To get that lease signed, when they moved into the building, it was all about rent, TI, and what's going to cost you to stay in the building. So those numbers are important, because if I can give you, I can charge you $1 more square foot in rent, which goes straight to my investors, and spend $1 less on energy, my building's worth more.
But which factor drives, if you did a sensitivity analysis of all of the factors that drive tenant occupancy, is it their energy costs?
I think it's the experience.
So Tommy, let's talk about the data question again, because I obviously want to bring John into the conversation as well. This whole concept of the Internet of Things, right? And you got, Cisco's going to be connecting 800 bazillion points of data over the next however many years. You guys go to the Cisco website, the Internet
30 billion, we think.
30 billion is
Over the next 5 years.
that was 800 billion.
That's just at his house.
So I mean, seriously, are we really going to connect everything to the Internet of Things?
Listen, you've heard about data and connectivity. Do you know that only 1% of what can be connected is connected today? So we have 99% to go. Today, it's about 13 billion devices. We keep track of that because it's in our business, it's important. We think it's about 50 billion by 2020. So we have 30 more billion to go. We talked with Nils before. You know, I think we're beyond the data now. I think it's not about the data anymore. It's about the value of the data and about the analytics on how good you can qualify that data. And so how much data you get, I think, is important, and how fast, and how better the analytics you can apply to it. So is it because you are smarter than the competition on how you analyze your data and how you then apply changes to your building so that it becomes more attractive and the experience is better? I'm sure it is. I guess.
Absolutely.
Right? You need to tell us your secret. But it's very clear that we see and we know, and we've done business cases around it in many different vertical areas. Manufacturing for us is the biggest opportunity in the Internet of Everything. And by the way, we don't call it Internet of Things, we call it Internet of Everything. Do you know why?
Not just
Do you know why?
It's everything, because it has to be everything.
No, it's a very interesting point. The things are in the bottom of the pyramid. It's the sensors, it's the things which generate that data. And it's not just about raw data, it's about making it meaningful data. And then making that meaningful data get you to a new process. So dealing with things differently the way you've been dealing with them before, and bringing people into that process, that combination is what we call the Internet of Everything. So it's not just about having a sensor connected, now everything is going to be better. No, if I don't know how to deal with that data, if I don't change the way I've been doing things before, if I don't get people to interact differently than the way they've been doing before, I'm not going to make any difference. And we've seen that over the next 10 years, it's a huge opportunity. Manufacturing is first, second is public sector. In public sector, we see that buildings is an amazing opportunity. And so we're going to do more things in buildings.
So I understand from Cisco's standpoint the business opportunity, no question. But from an owner or a municipal government standpoint, I would challenge you by asking, what problem are you solving? What question are you asking? So if I'm an ecologist or a botanist and I go into an ecosystem, and cities are ecosystems, buildings are ecosystems, it's the interaction that we currently don't understand. In fact, we probably understand certain forest habitats better than we understand urban habitats. Am I going to censor literally everything before I start composing my set of hypotheses and questions? No, I'm probably going to say, well, you know, we've seen a decline in the bee population, so let's figure out what bees we want to track, and they did this in the UK last week.
But how did you
to
measure,
figure out
what's
keeping them from reproducing?
How did you measure the decline in the bee population? How did you know?
They connected.
You counted the bees?
It had nothing to do with sensors, I can tell you that.
No, but
little sensors on the
I'm using the same example, right?
Absolutely.
The speedometer, right? If you don't know how fast you're driving, how do you know you make a difference? How do you know that you're beyond that speed limit?
It's got to make your life easier.
But
The whole point is, I can't wait for my washer and dryer to die in my house. Because now they have connected washer and dryers, so I can put a load of laundry in, and I can turn it on for my cell phone. I can't wait.
Or
If
no,
my wife
no.
goes out of town, I'm probably going to break them.
But
I
you
can go
still
buy
have
new
to
ones.
put the
I
load
just
of
bought a new-
laundry in the first place. So how hard it is to push the button?
And how
I
long
have
does
children.
it take you to
Yeah,
program
there
the
you go.
washer
It doesn't
and
do it
dryer-
himself.
dryer?
I have children. They can put it in.
And when they break down, do you call an IT guy? I mean, the time, how much
Tommy,
time
come
is
fix it.
actually saving you?
I'll be there in a
That's
minute.
what Akridge does.
Thanks, bye.
But Tommy, you're the 1%, and maybe not in terms of wealth, but certainly in terms of geekiness. So let's talk about the
It's about making life.
99%.
It's about making my life easier.
Yeah, but I just bought a
Laundry
new
your
washing
biggest
machine
problem?
and a new dryer.
But I think it'd be cool to be able to turn it on. Or when I walk up to my refrigerator,
cool, but it
I know
comes-
what's in the refrigerator, so I know what I can make for dinner because my wife is gone.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's cool, but is it also useful?
No.
Absolutely.
Does it really improve
Absolutely.
the efficiency of a building, the welfare of people in this room, the productivity? And I think that you can give examples where if you have lighting fixtures with IP addresses that tell you whether a place is occupied or not, you can start to think about heating, cooling, lighting, etc. Okay, I can see the sense in that, but I also see a lot of nonsense in that. The Internet of Everything, is it really useful to connect the whole world, and really for what
And
purpose?
do we have
Because it's
time?
and do we have the capital? Because it's expensive. And you can build a new building and fit it out, Cisco style, Internet of Everything, that's your building. But at the same time, we have so many buildings that are, take a building like this, how are you going to do that, and what's the capital required to do it, and what's the return on investment that the owner of this building, well, they might not have the same hurdle rate as a private investor, but that a private investor has.
Now, Tommy, you do have a building. You're pulling 80,000 points of data out of that on a real-time basis, which I'm sure you could probably show us on your cell phone right now, but please don't. So tell us, I mean,
That's just my house.
That's just the house. You could pull up the webcams in the chicken coop.
Yes, I can.
Shows that. But seriously, does that add value? I mean, how much data is too much data?
I've yet to see too much data. I've yet
That's
to see
why
it.
you're a CTO.
I've yet to see it. I mean, if you don't use it, so be it. But to have it and to not have it when you need it for something. So an owner calls and says, you know what, we want to know what the occupancy or what the load rate of something is, and to be able to go back and just say, I got that data, whether we've used it for the last 10 years or not, the ability to have it and go pull from it, show me a value.
The only
An
thing
investor is going to come back and say, there's no way this guy's giving us that information.
So
When you come back with a quantitative information and say, here it is, they're like,
Let's
in an ideal world, of course, we would pull infinite data and be able to look for patterns in it infinitely well. But there's an affordability question, which Nils brought up, and then there's a time question. So
Sure.
from my perspective, we have 5, maximum 10 years to get on a trajectory where we stabilize the climate in a way that is habitable and ideal for
Sustainable,
human life. And so the ideal scenario is no longer a luxury that we have. Rolling out over the next 10 to 20 years and finally covering all of these buildings with the instrumentation we would ideally like to see is not a luxury that we've given ourselves.
so what's dictated change? Throughout eternity, people have dictated change. So if you can change, maybe the people in this room aren't the right people. Maybe it's our children that are the right people that are going to make the change. The change is going to be made. The technology is there. People are going to adopt it. We talked about this morning about cell phones. I had a BlackBerry in 1997, as did I bet half the other people in this room. You carried a BlackBerry that was green, had a green screen, and you carried a cell phone. It didn't take till 2010 to make my life easier. I realized in 1997 I couldn't live without that device. Okay, it took the market 13 years to catch up. It's just like how long did it take for every house to have a TV?
But a
How
building
long
is
for
not a cell phone. A building is a long-lived
You
durable
spend
that was built
more
typically
time-
50 years ago. We spend 90% of the time indoors. But the building is a long-lived durable that's not replaced as fast as a car, as a phone, as a light bulb. I see many people in this room that are either owners or developers or investors.
What's the average lease? What's the average term of a lease? 10 years?
Yeah.
How long do you hold your car?
Well, I actually don't
7
have
to
a
10
car,
years?
but, yeah. I take the train. It's super sustainable.
And if the lease term is 7 to 10 years, you're truthfully at 6 years or at 8 years, you're out shopping somewhere else. They're going to buy you out of the lease, so you're out of it in 5 years. And it's easier to keep a client in a building than it is to go find a new client.
Well, and in the commercial real estate space, you're right, but we're also talking about government long haul. We're talking about corporate real estate. We're talking about hotels, hospitality. We're talking about, so there's a lot of other different building types that aren't necessarily affected by the lease term and the lease rates and things like that. So obviously, those are major drivers for you in the commercial sector. I did see a couple of hands go up, so I promise we're going to take questions from the audience. If we could get a mic, I know that there's a hand here. If you guys do have a question, raise your hand, and we'll have somebody come around to you. And take as many questions from the audience as we can.
And AquaSuite's only $1,200.
They're going to
For
continue a
$1,200 you can get
conversation
real-time
over
energy
here
data
with or without.
all day long.
Jason Traeger from Persistent Efficiency. So you've talked about how you want to replace your washer dryer, and you've talked about the affordability of data, and we've talked about how there could be too much data, and we've talked about the fact that there's a timeline, right? What I'm missing here is, when people rent a building, it's a financing model. Right? When we get data, the whole point of getting this data and using it to leverage the change to really mass produce energy efficiency is we need to mine the data to build financing models to allow us to change the world quickly. And if you could talk a little bit about how this data allows you to, say, underwrite efficiency or produce efficiency in a faster, better manner, I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
John?
Yeah, I see very interesting new business models where, first of all, there is no upfront capital expense. It's a performance management type of style where basically people say, if I don't make savings, you don't pay. And if we do make savings, we share the savings. And that's how people now make a lot of interesting models. I see it in the energy market. I see it in the lighting market. I'm sure I'm seeing it in the HVAC market. So yeah, I think that is the way to go to make the speed we need because, yeah, cities cannot afford to do this across a city. Some people cannot afford to do it in a home. So if you want to do that in a forward-looking way, I think that type of model is a good model to go right now.
Well, it's about investor confidence. So Cisco predicts that you're going to save 11.5% on whatever your HVAC, and having the confidence, first of all, that Cisco is going to be in business. Well, that's not really a question when it's Cisco that actually deploys that technology. But there's many startups where you can wonder, are they really going to be in business 5 years down the road? And then there's the confidence that 11.5% is really achieved. And I think that's where data can help as well in getting, for an investor, more confidence around, I make this investment of $200,000 or $500,000, is it really going to return what Cisco promised me? And performance models are great as long as the guarantees come from an organization that, that's rated and preferably A or AAA and not a startup. So I think that's where data can be useful. In terms of underwriting energy efficiency, I believe that separately underwriting energy efficiency investments, certainly in the commercial space, the investments are too small. The headache for the owner is too big. So it's really going to be integrated in the transaction of a building and the refinancing of an asset, where separately underwriting, a $50,000 lighting retrofit is just not worth it. Transaction costs are too high. That might work with public real estate, though, in a public-private partnership with a hospital or with a building like this.
I come from the corporate sustainability world, and there's some interesting parallels that have preceded this movement in the building space, in that about 10 years ago, very, very active, dare I say, activist investors started asking large corporates, what does your sustainability risk look like? And no one knew how to answer that question. They had no data to respond to those inquiries. And the shareholder proxies were, pretty much laughed off in the shareholder annual meetings. Now, annual performance reviews, otherwise known as reports to SEC or through their CSR reports, or to GRI, or whatever, DJSI, CDP, whatever reporting structure they so choose. And as a result of that, they're starting to become standardized and comparable. And now on your Bloomberg terminal, when an analyst or an equity analyst signs on, they see every corporation's CDP leadership score. They know the sustainability risks and opportunities of that company. I'm not saying it's perfect, but all of a sudden the investment community can actually start stack ranking people because the data has been collected, but to answer specific questions, that's my issue, to answer specific questions that the investor community was interested in answering, and then the capital starts flowing. So I think that's an important parallel that maybe we should take a look at.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, we're done. No, I'm kidding. Yes, sir.
So I've heard a lot of great input a lot of great input today about advanced analytics and ambitious models for how the data is going to be leveraged. But I'm wondering how, over the lifetime of a building or maybe a lease term, you deal with the baseline issue, because we all know in a service economy, more and more dollar value is flowing through a commercial building. And so tenants are looking to add value. Maybe they're adding little data centers, maybe they're adding, other devices we haven't even imagined yet. And we also heard that, maybe 70% of the energy used in the building is tenant-driven, not core-driven. So how do you deal with that baseline issue? If you're going to enter some kind of energy savings, shared savings agreement, and you're dealing with very granular, very high volume data, I think the value is great, but how do you make that work in a financial contractual sense so you can actually bank on baseline and savings data, not just for a day, not just for a week, but in a multi-year contractual sense?
Well, I think that's a great question. Also, how do we balance the fact that the demand for energy is going up and the drive for using less energy is trying to go up as well? So you kind of have these two forces working against each other. Tommy, from your perspective, what do you think?
Education. Educate, educate, educate. You build a building and you either expect what kind of clients you're going to get in the building or tenants you're going to get in the building, and hope you fill it with those clients. If not, you find other clients to fill that building. But educating them and making sure you find the right clients that fill your building to the way it's built. You're not going to build a hotel and then go try and lease it to office space. You're going to build a commercial space or a residential or whatever space and try and fill it with that kind of client. We educate the client, we educate through the leasing process, we educate through when they occupy the space, we educate our engineers. But at the end of the day, if the client decides they want to put a data center in, we made sure that we made the floor not strong enough to support the racks. So they can't do it. No, I'm just kidding. They have to do it. And if that lowers your energy score, that's what's going to happen. But you're going to have a happy client, and hopefully they come back. So you can't really say that you can't do it unless in your lease you specifically say you can't have a data center, you can't put a generator, you can't have a split system, you can't do after-hours HVAC control, and then you know what you're going to have? A vacant building.
Exactly, yeah. No, I think that the building, as well as the energy consumed in the building, are inputs for a company to be productive. So if the lawyer decides, that they're going to use a lot of energy or lease a whole floor, whether it's never occupied, that's their decision. If they put in a server farm, well, that's their decision. In 2013, 79% of electricity consumption in the US was in buildings. Last year, it was 81%. It's very clear the trajectory that we're on in terms of where electricity consumption is used. Buildings are part of the problem, if not the problem. That's the regulatory view as well. I think buildings are actually the solution. And not maybe so much the solution in lowering baseline, because there's only so much you can do, but in really thinking about peak demand. I might be influenced by the fact that I was at Enernox conference this morning. So, peak demand, et cetera, and shaving off peak demand is in my head. But I really think that's more of an issue than just only thinking about lowering baseline demand. It's about shaving off those peaks and being smart there. That saves us building another power plant. Plus then there's decentralized generation. On the one hand, there's efficiency. On the other hand, there's renewable or decentralized generation. And they'll go hand in hand. But it's unavoidable that Bank of America is going to use energy in their building. And you're not going to, forbid them to use energy because, they pay the rent and it's their decision. So it's a balancing act.
I see it as somewhat similar to cap and trade systems. So a cap and trade system, the broader it's defined, the more economic sectors it includes, the cheaper the ton of carbon reduced. Because the market gravitates towards those who are best equipped and best positioned and best capitalized to reduce carbon. So looking at individual buildings is kind of a fool's errand for that reason. We should be looking at portfolios, as many of you are. Ideally, we should be looking even broader than that at district scale. And that's where you're going to find the cheapest reductions and the greatest opportunity for renewables.
So we can't talk about smart buildings and energy efficient buildings without having the conversation about smart cities as well. So John, I want to talk to you a little bit about where do you see this whole movement going in terms of smart buildings and then ultimately impacting smart cities to be able to aggregate data and drive energy efficiency at a municipal level?
Oh. I've been in smart cities now 7 years or so. I've been doing most of the projects you hear about, I have the pleasure to be there and to be the architect of most of them. Unfortunately, none of them cares about buildings. If you talk to people who, who are in the say, and of course it's not the main source of input you need to get in a city, because it's not only the people who constitute what's happening in a city, it's also the people who live there. Because there is a battle going on between cities, and the battle is between, it's not about what is the coolest city, it's about where do I get the biggest bang for my buck, and the millennials are the new generations that want to go somewhere where there is a future and so on. Now, if I ask them the top 3 things about what is on their mind, unfortunately, the buildings are not part of that top 3.
Smart cities is about transportation, about access to information, about
It's about
data,
safe. It's about a safe city.
Safety.
It's about traffic. Yeah, it's about those.
And why do you
things.
think that is? Why is there a disconnect?
I fear it's education. I fear it's education of the people who control policies, who perhaps don't always know that 80% of energy being used is happening in buildings, right? And not in
Electricity,
electricity of in the use. Of course, a lot of it is in manufacturing, but I don't think they know. Is it then? They of course look at the pain points and they say, okay, these are the 3 pain points. They ask their citizens, what do you think? And the citizens then choose out of those 3 pain points the number 1 pain point, and that's what they want to work on first. And then you come with. What we then do is come with an architecture which can solve that particular issue, but also allows them to plug in what we call solutions, which can deal with the next issue and the next issue and the next issue. Is buildings one of those things? Yeah, but not enough. So I clearly, I have to say, I have to be honest. This is the view I have in the world, and the US hasn't really caught on smart cities since a couple of years ago.
I think it might be a function of your definition of smart as an all-seeing internet, sensors, and big data.
That's not how we see it.
Because the cities we've worked with have impressive work around smart cities, but it's more in designing good policy, smart policy, and using technology to inform that policy, but not becoming so enamored with the technology that that's actually what's driving the decision-making. So
we never talk about policy. We never talk about the technology. When
okay,
we
fair
do
enough.
that. I'm serious.
To give you an example with DC Bid, who I gather are hosting this, and our friends from there are here today. They have one of the best building energy benchmarks and one of the earliest disclosure requirements, and Cliff Major 6.
Well, you just told me that you don't like Energy Star.
I didn't say Energy Star.
Oh, that was you. Oh.
So the building energy, no, but hear me out.
I didn't know you didn't like Energy Star.
So the benchmark is the municipal sector's ability to drive change among, let's call them friendly but reluctant building owners, okay? However, again, it's not enough. It's not directive as to what you should do. All it tells you is, how do you stack up against me? Well, great, you weigh 10 pounds more than I do. Well, what am I supposed to do with that? Should you diet? Should you exercise? I don't know. So that's where simulating what's possible comes in. And so we've partnered up with DC Bid, and then by extension, the DC Department of Environment, to model the data that they've already collected, and then simulate on top of it what energy conservation measures they could put into place. And then that's going to help them target select building owners who have the best financial opportunity when it comes to energy reduction. That's smart.
Great.
It has nothing to do with sensors.
I think it's competition. When Washington played Seattle in the playoffs a couple years ago, if Washington won, I think the Seattle mayor had to wear a shirt or something like that. Start at the building level. Start competition in the city. Mm-hmm. And then grow to the city level. And by reporting and making people see what the buildings are consuming, make it a competition. It shouldn't just be about sports. It should be about everything. I mean, sports is one game a year. Energy is 365 or 364 days a year every day. So DC just beat LA for, what was it, Energy Star, most Energy Star buildings. Let's see if anybody even picks it up and runs with the story. Should they? Absolutely.
Will more people come to DC now because of that?
Well, I think if you actually look at DC right now, I think DC is growing by the biggest in urban area, I think, in the country. And I think we have more college-educated people coming to DC now than ever have been before. I know the population here is growing, the real estate value is growing, and oh yeah, our buildings are mostly leased.
So
But I also
perhaps
think, though, I also think when your city gets a reputation as being a green energy
That's
efficient
helps it
city,
too.
that you're going to drive those types of corporations to want to be in that city just by the reputation of the city.
But is that driven, and that's John's point, and this is more holistic, is that driven by how green your buildings are? So DC, congratulations, most Energy Star rated buildings. Well, it's also a very big city, so in the Green Building Adoption Index, they're only number 10, so look at the denominator as well. But what about public transport? Because if I get $2, and I know that there's now the silver line, I just heard it's only $11.60 to now get here by public transport. Before that, you know, it took me $90 on an Uber to actually get here. Get to JFK in New York, you know, takes me $90 to get into the city. I get to San Francisco, I hop on the BART, it's painless, it's safe, etc. So
I would not use us as your model of public transport, but okay.
well, yeah, it depends. If you go from the airport to
But
downtown,
the citizens do.
it's pretty
People
good.
living,
That's kinda where
people
it
coming
stops.
to the city, they do.
Okay.
And they care about that. They don't care about the office buildings being green.
Exactly.
I'm just trying to make a point that it is the combination of the
Yeah,
citizens.
I've never seen a tourist come to DC and say, can I walk into your roof?
No, that's the issue. That's
It
the
matters
issue.
to the
And that's the issue why.
Well, when tenants are looking for space in cities and they
That's
do the
clear.
studies,
Of
you know,
course.
I think that definitely plays in. Ari.
So for John and Emma, I'm curious in this conversation if either of you have had any involvement with eco districts, because I think a lot of this conversation does start to get into the issue of why the cities are focusing on this and how you do connect in small little pockets, but establish those, and someone talked about it earlier about it's portfolios of buildings in same location. And if I think certainly technology would play a big role in that, and there's probably a role for both of what each of you do. So I'm curious if you've had involvement or can kind of talk about how we do sort of, you know, go to step one and step two in getting these buildings that are part of these cities to be kind of connected into what's happening in that space.
John?
I clearly see that, especially in the US, there is a much bigger drive than in the rest of the world to that movement. And eco-districts is a vehicle, actually, on where you can see an impact in that. And I think that people understand, people who then decide to come to a particular place or decide where they want to live and where they want to bring up their children, that they will look at those type of places where there is a drive towards more efficiency and more green and friendliness and less energy and all that stuff. And I see that the US, since a couple of years, are really focusing on that, and it starts to show, absolutely. Less than it, I don't know what you see in Europe. I see less and less.
I see not a lot.
Exactly. So the eastern part of the world is another story. But I see a lot, and I think the US is leading there. So I think it has an impact, and it's only good. But again, it's a combination of what is about the public transport? How safe is that city? Can I walk at 10 o'clock in the evening on the street, and is it safe? And that's what people still care about more than anything else.
So eco-districts are appealing to me because our environmental challenge is ultimately our failure to think systemically, and eco-districts represent systems of systems.
Correct.
And so one of the things that we've embarked upon, you probably all know us for our building design tools, but we have infrastructure design tools, manufacturing tools, product design tools. So it's also a very convenient exemplar of the combination of our tools in our portfolio, and no other competitor can touch us when you think vertically and horizontally. So about 3 years ago, we embarked on a research project to understand how do cities define sustainability, what are their top requirements, given all the heterogeneity between cities or eco-districts at the micro level, how could we provide volume software at the 10 million customer type of level that would serve multiple cities? And with that, we've come to an understanding that it really comes down to 5 pillars. One, you have to help them set science-based targets, and cities are increasingly doing that on the climate front. 2, you have to help them make a triple bottom line business case, because cities have to sell just like companies have to sell. They have to sell to their elected politicians, they have to sell to the local community who doesn't want construction in their way. 3rd, you have to absorb water. These cities have to absorb water, whether they're coastal or inland, they're getting wet or they're getting sludge, and increasingly so with an unpredictable climate. So we're big fans of green infrastructure and helping simulate the performance of green infrastructure. We've been working with both Vancouver and District of Columbia on doing that at a district scale. Fourth, you have to retrofit the energy hogs. So first you have to figure out which they are, and then you target your audit dollars accordingly. And then fifth, you have to transport people, not cars. And we all know, or we should know, that it takes 10 times more space, which is at a premium in urban centers, to transport people in a car than it does through most other means. And so we have to create complete streets that provide for multiple modes. So between those 5 things, we've found that actually cities are quite interested in looking at both modeling, data collection, and simulation across the systems of systems and the interconnectivity between them.
So let's talk about net zero energy buildings, because there's a lot of talk in the industry about, a lot of buildings can't even squeeze 10% energy out, and well, let's go to zero. So let's talk about how challenging is that? I mean, I was at a conference a couple weeks ago, and they were talking about passive house and living building challenge, and some of the case studies were like an 1,800 square foot home with skylights in a mild climate, and so do we have enough net zero energy building case studies, first of all, to say that yes, this works, that we have the technology to do it? And secondly, is it going to work everywhere? I mean, can we apply the same net zero energy types of applications in New York City or in Washington, D.C.? And I know Tommy wants to talk about this one, so I'm going to go to Tommy first. What are your thoughts on net zero buildings?
I try to be optimistic, but does anybody see the dragon flying around? I think it's pie in the sky. I mean, you could do it for a single-story building, maybe 25,000 square feet, and I think you still have to quantify it, saying it's net zero minus sewer, or not net sewer minus water, or net sewer minus net zero. No way, absolutely not. I mean, not with today's technology, unless you have. I'd like to see a commercial office building with, let's go 100,000 square feet, that's realistically in an urban environment that is 100% net zero. No energy, no electricity, no gas, no water, no sewer.
No tenants.
No.
100% tenants.
100% Full. I mean, I'd love to see it. I've looked at probably 4 or 5 projects that say they're net zero, and it's all via offsetting. Oh, we have solar panels that make so much energy, and we offset the cost of this. Well, okay, I guess on paper you can push the numbers around and say it's net zero, but in reality, take the building, put it in the middle of the desert, and let it sustain itself. If it can, then it's net zero.
Well, so Europe is interesting because by 2018, all new construction needs to be, of public buildings needs to be zero net. Now, Europe being Europe, you can interpret that in 27 different ways with the 27 different countries. By 2020, so 5 years down the road, all new construction, whether it's residential or commercial, needs to be zero net. And again, what is zero net? Who knows? But those are the targets that have been set a long time ago, and that's what developers work towards. Is it achievable at a realistic cost? I don't think at this point.
Well, so let me ask you a question. I mean, we're setting benchmarks and regulations, and this is a requirement. I mean, how do we pass legislation
look at
that
cars.
isn't achievable?
Look at cars at miles per gallon CAFE standards. The car industry and the manufacturing industry say, we can never do this. And we set the guidelines, and of course you have to set them 5 or 10 years in advance. You can't say, well, tomorrow, all cars need to be as efficient as the Japanese cars. It's going to be challenging. But you can say 5 or 10 or 15 years down the road, this is what we expect from the car manufacturing industry.
Now, do you think that's only applicable for new development with new technologies, or how do we deal with the other 99% of the existing building stock?
Well, I think you get you already see it in the DC, you get a bifurcation of the real estate market, where Tommy's buildings are the new normal. It's not a premium space. That's the kind of the space that you want to be in. The rest needs to be either renovated or, when that's cost prohibitive, will be torn down and will be redeveloped. So I think it's a regular real estate play. It's just that the real estate sector doesn't innovate very fast, and this regulation in Europe, for example, and maybe it will follow in the US, we'll see, actually forces us to think more here's my Dutch accent, in a more innovative way, and forces us to build better buildings. And it will show us that we can do it.
Net zero, can we do it or not?
I think we should, I agree with your point that you set the bar and the market as well as technology typically responds. Most companies that have set greenhouse gas targets have met them early. because they just started looking for waste and they found more than they expected.
Yeah.
So that's our regulator's job, is to actually say, this is feasible, in fact, it's good for society, and get on it, guys. And then let the private sector figure out how. But in terms of setting net zero targets for buildings, I think we have to be sensitive to building type and climate zone.
Well, you also have to
So
be
building type,
sensitive-
maybe distribution centers and warehouses, as CEC has shown, 60% of those can go net zero today, existing technology.
Yeah.
Maybe your properties, it wouldn't apply.
Well, you also have to be sensitive to economic feasibility. I mean, maybe it's technologically possible, but it is economically feasible, especially in the commercial real estate space.
Well, we talked about cost of building LEED certified buildings, and Tommy gave a great example that, building a LEED Platinum building was costing something like $300,000 more than building it at LEED standard. That can either say something about LEED or about their capability, or really about the fact that building buildings in a slightly different, better, more efficient, more sustainable way is not necessarily more expensive. Maybe, 10 years ago, because the consultants were so expensive, sorry for the consultants, that really drove up the cost. The Bullet Center, I was on the phone with some guys today, is 27% more expensive than had they built it according to code. Well, it's also a super premium building that will attract super premium tenants that will pay a super premium rent because they want to be in the coolest building in the United States. So is it going to be, from a return perspective, zero net? I think so, because the 27% higher construction cost is going to be offset by the fact that people are going to pay higher rents, lower utility costs, and the value is going to, 27%, I don't think that's unreasonable.
John, what are your thoughts?
I'm working with the city of Copenhagen, right? And they have an even bolder type of statement. They want to be, the city wants to be carbon neutral by, what is it, 2025?
Yeah.
Now, if you are walking around in Copenhagen, they built cycle highways. And Nils coming from Amsterdam, he knows how important cycles are. They built cycle highways. So they don't build anything anymore for cars and all that stuff. It's all gone. I think 65% of the people all drive to their work with a bicycle. All of them.
So old people don't live there.
What is that?
Old people don't live there.
And that's perhaps a way to attract type of people you want to attract in your city.
Well, no, this is interesting. So
Someone with a broken leg doesn't live in the
bikes-
city.
Tommy,
You break
there's a
your
solution.
arm.
A guy with a broken leg can
Electric
still
bikes. My wife is 33, has an electric bike. Yeah, and she's not 65, really, it's my wife, 33. So as she goes with her electric bike, she still has to pedal, but she goes about 60 miles per hour, while
That's a
pedaling
motorcycle, that's
relaxed.
not a bike.
16.
60 miles per hour.
Not
It's about
60.
He said 60.
No, 16.
She pedals
Again,
really
yeah, but that's
fast.
innovation.
Holy buckets, it's a jet-powered bike.
Yeah. It's a solar-powered
They
bike.
call it the
You
Batmo bike.
You can do this. You can do this.
No, seriously. But the question is, of course, if you then take the electric bike, you still have to charge it. Where is the charging coming from? But
A solar panel that the first 7 years, the energy you use to make is what it costs to make the cell. And the next 7 years, it's the energy that it costs to buy the cell.
so I think,
The 14 years or the 25, it's cost.
yeah. So they have this bold thing, and I can tell you, everything they do, the policymakers, the people who, everything they do with their money, but also the people living there, they all live for that one goal. And even if they don't make it, I applaud them for trying to do it, because everything they do is around that goal. They have an amazing challenge, and everybody is around that same challenge. And that is to be applauded for. And we'll see whether they can make it. And even if it's 5% or whatever, they've done, I'm sure there will be numerous use cases coming out of Copenhagen for us to learn from. And yeah, we cannot change DC into a cycling community.
Oh, yeah,
I understand that, but
And you got to get rid of trash, too, because you can't have any trash
Can't have any trash.
in the building.
yeah.
Can we take one last question from the audience? Does anybody have a burning question they want to ask?
I did.
Kevin.
Kevin Kamsher.
I don't see
Where are you?
Oh, there you are.
There you are.
Standing up. First of all, Tommy's got a really interesting version of what net zero means, but there is a nice
To me.
Yeah, it's not what everybody else is using, but that's okay. You produce as much electricity as you consume over the course of a year. Typical net zero definition. Doesn't have to be off the grid, and usually is not. There's a nice 250,000 square foot office building with a data center in it that's net zero in Golden, Colorado. Happy to take you there anytime or give you the stats on it.
Would that happen to be a GSA building?
It does not. It's actually owned and operated by the Department of Energy through Battelle. It's on
And
the,
designed with our software, by the way.
exactly.
And there's, yeah, and I'm not going to say that.
But I think John made the greatest point. We had a renovation project that also ended up in Netzero. And by the way, both of these projects were $0 extra added, so standard budget. So there was no 27% premium on either of these. First Netzero building on the historic register also in Colorado, but again, a project manager who was doing it. But I think I just want to applaud John's point. The whole point about net zero goals is it gets you to think in a very integrated and different way, and even if you make it like to 10%, then you're 90% better than the average building. And that's what the city challenges and the groups of building challenges can do for you. So I think that's a terrific point, but it is achievable in some cases at no financial premium today.
Well, and thank you. That's a great way to wrap up the session, because I hope that the sessions today and the speakers today have caused you to leave here and think in an innovative and different way about what you can do in your buildings and how we can drive energy efficiency. So at this point, I want to thank our great panelists and speakers that joined us. I thought that was fantastic, by the way. I don't know if you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Thank you.